All right, well, hello, everybody. Greetings from Minnesota in the US. Thank you for inviting us to talk with the group today. I'm Matt Sobek, and I'm joined by my colleague, Rodrigo Lovatón. And I'm a historian by training, and Rodrigo is an economist, so I think we fit this group very well. We'll be describing IPUMS, the world's largest population microdata collection today. Strangely, my slides won't advance. All right, so here's our agenda. We'll start with an overview of IPUMS, followed by the work we do to optimize the data for research, and finally, we'll give a brief tour of the website to demonstrate the dissemination system. So what is IPUMS, and how might it fit with your research interests, particularly historical research interests? So IPUMS is a group of data infrastructure projects housed at the University of Minnesota. It's the world's largest collection of publicly available population microdata. And the central idea of IPUMS is to harmonize microdata to enable comparative research. And we provide the data to researchers at no cost. So here are a few metrics to give you a sense of the scale. IPUMS covers more than 150 countries and includes more than 2 billion person records. And we're confident that we disseminate more population microdata than any other organization in the world. So IPUMS is actually composed of 9 major data collections. IPUMS began in the 1990s as an effort to combine all the existing US microdata samples into one consistent series from the 19th century to the present. And we now call that project IPUMS USA, because in the early 2000s, we launched IPUMS International to harmonize global census microdata. And in the following years, we branched out to several survey data collections. And I'll point out that that includes the IPUMS Global Health Collection, which harmonizes the demographic and health surveys for low and middle income countries from the 1980s to the present. And there are also aggregate data projects that have the official tabulated census results and GIS data. So for this audience today, we're going to focus on the census microdata, specifically IPUMS International. So here's the IPUMS International homepage. The data collection includes over 1 billion person records and spans most of the world. Rodrigo will talk more about the website later, so don't worry. We have data agreements with 117 countries, and we're currently disseminating data for 104 of them. So in this map, the blue countries are where we're disseminating data, and the green are where we have agreements, but we don't have the data yet, or we haven't processed it. And most of the census samples are between 1 and 10% of the population, and they date from the 1970s to the present. Really, most of them from the 80s to the present, I would say. And importantly, most countries have entrusted IPUMS with more than one census, so you can study change over time as well as compare between countries. And we've recently also started adding household and survey and labor force survey data as well. So IPUMS data users come from all over the world, and these are the top institutional users on each continent. And here's a little shout out to the London School of Economics at the top of the Euro list. Over 35,000 researchers have registered to access the data, and the largest percentage of these are economists, and followed by a good bit by demographers and sociologists, and many of these are graduate students. So it's really used in teaching and dissertation research. So IPUMS International is vast, but what does it have to offer to historical researchers? So in the 2000s, we teamed up with a group of historians and archivists to create the North Atlantic Population Project. And the aim of that was to make full count census data available, mostly from the 19th and early 20th centuries. And we ultimately folded the NAP data sets into IPUMS International. And more recently, we added historical data for Egypt, thanks to Mohamed, who'll be talking later. And that has rounded out our collection nicely. So here are the 42 pre-1950 census samples that are in IPUMS International. The census years in bold indicate where we have 100% microdata for the population. And all these data sets are organized into households. And 6 of these 10 countries also have modern data. So you can do analysis of social change over a century or more in these countries. So let's take a quick look at the availability of a few key variables. The all in this table indicates every data set for that country has the variable, and some indicates that some data sets lack it. And of course, all the samples include age and sex, and marital status and relationship to the household are also generally available. You usually know where people were born and thus their lifetime migration, and you often know their religion. Occupation is universal, so you know something about socioeconomic status in all these data sets, except the earliest one from Canada. And most of the data sets include, well, they all include low-level geography, which is very important for all sorts of kinds of research. And most of them include people's names, which enables linking to other sources. And in fact, there are some data sets in the NAP collection that do link people across specific pairs of censuses. So IPUMS International is a unique resource, but the IPUMS USA data collection has some properties that might also particularly interest this group. Most of the US historical census data are not incorporated into IPUMS International. Most of them are samples. So this is where you get access to the big data for IPUMS for the USA. So IPUMS USA includes 100% data for every US census from 1850 to 1950. That's 800 million person records. And these data sets are the result of a collaboration with the genealogy company Ancestry.com. And the topics include marriage, ethnicity, immigration, education, work, and even wealth and income in some years. But the most exciting aspect of the full count data is the possibility of linking records between censuses. So the IPUMS multi-generational longitudinal panel, which is not easy to say, is our US census linking project. And this is the screen in the USA data extract system where you select linked records. So the census years are on the axes, and the button at the intersection of the two censuses selects the records that are linked between them. So the numbers on the buttons indicate the number of linked records in millions of cases. So this is really big. So here I've selected a set of 3 linked census pairs that each span a 30-year period. So it's all persons linked between 1900 to 1930, and from 1910 to 1940, and from 1920 to 1950. So in this example, I'm requesting 71 million linked cases from our extract system. And every linked person receives a persistent ID, so you can track them wherever they are. If any census that we find them in, they're going to have that same ID. So you can follow people across their whole life history in some cases. So that's where I'm going to hand it off now to Rodrigo to talk about the research and really our methods.
Thank you very much, Matt. And let me
stop my share, give you a chance.
thank you.
And I think we're going to have some time to answer some questions, hopefully. Although that's up to Neil, he's the boss.
And can you see my presentation? Yeah, okay, yeah. Perfect. So in this second section, we're going to see how IPUMS optimizes data to be used for research. And I'm going to focus more on IPUMS International, but these are characteristics that are shared by the different IPUMS projects. So what are the advantages of IPUMS for research? Like Matt was saying in the beginning, so our work is to simplify doing comparative analysis across countries and over time. And this is because of certain characteristics of the data, the metadata and the dissemination system. And I'm listing some ideas in this slide, and I'm going to discuss with a little bit more detail in the following slides. So let me start by saying that users have access to microdata samples at the individual level, which offer greater flexibility for research. We have extensive documentation and metadata that are all integrated into a single database. But the main contribution, also like Matt was emphasizing in the beginning, is this data harmonization process, where the same variable follows the same coding structure for any country or any census year. And we're going to have an example at the end of this section. And finally, IPUMS has this user-friendly online dissemination system that allows you to create these customized data extracts where you're selecting the specific censuses, census samples, and the specific variables that are relevant for your own research project. And in addition, the online dissemination system has other tools, like, for example, shapefiles for spatial analysis. We have an online tabulator that allows you to do some statistical analysis without having an stats package or without even downloading data from the web. We have a dedicated team for user support that will work with you on any questions that you may have, among other characteristics. But let's look at some of these advantages. So we always emphasize this. IPUMS does not have like a compilation of statistics or a predefined table, but you have access to microdata, and the slide includes a visual representation of what this data extract would be. And in this data extract, each of the lines, each of the rows represents a person, and different columns represent the variables corresponding to the responses of this person to one specific question on the census questionnaire. All of the data in IPUMS follows a standardized format, no matter how the data were originally formatted. And the information is very rich. In IPUMS International, we have samples with a really high density. Generally, well, for modern censuses, at least is around 10% of the population. And we have a wide availability of variables in the census questionnaire. And persons are generally organized into households, making it possible to study not only the individual, but also in the context of their families and their households. But again, the main advantage is this flexibility. You don't have to work with a predefined table. You can do your own tabulations or your own statistical analysis using the microdata. And we have extensive online documentation that includes sample characteristics, variable level information, and also the questionnaires and the instructions for enumerators that were used to collect the data. In the case of the sample characteristics, we have descriptions of the statistical operation, for example, the timing of data collection, and also of the sample design, including aspects such as the sample fraction or the sampling method used to create the samples. At the variable level, of course, we have well-documented response categories for all the harmonized variables, but also definitions of each of the variables in question, what exactly we are measuring with them, and a comparability discussion about any aspects that may affect the analysis of the variable when we're looking at different census year or different countries. And these definitions and comparability discussions are prepared by the IPUMS team during data processing, always reviewing the original census documentation. And the census questionnaires and the enumeration instructions are always produced in many different formats and many different languages. So we provide users with access to the original documents in a PDF format, as well as a plain text version in English. And we also use this plain text version to be able to link the variables with the census documentation. So at the variable level, you can see the specific question or questions that were used during data collection to ask about the information included in this variable. But I mentioned one of the main advantages of the data dissemination system is that it allows you to create these customized data extracts. So let's say you're interested specifically in 3 censuses from Argentina, Chile, and Cuba, and your project requires information about the type of water supply, the person's sex and education. So you select this information and you send this extract request that goes to the extract system that takes first the information from Argentina, including these 3 variables in addition to a sample ID, and combines that information with the data from Chile and for Cuba. So you're not downloading the whole data set, for the census, but you receive one single data set that includes 3 censuses, 4 variables, more than 6 million records, and everything with these harmonized codes. And one of the main aspects of the value added that we give to the data is this variable harmonization process. And let's see a concrete example. So we have this original information for marital status for 3 censuses for Bangladesh, Mexico, and Kenya. It's not difficult to see that the coding structures are not compatible, but you can also see that there are some differences in the concepts that are represented in some of these censuses. In the case of Mexico, for example, we have the civil and religious unions, and in the case of Kenya, we have these polygamous and monogamous unions. So in our work, we start with these original coding structures that are the input information for the harmonized variables. We import these variables into what we call a translation table that you can think about as a correspondence table. And then we align all of the concepts that we consider to be equivalent. And this is in close consultation with, well, not only the labels, but also the census documentation. And so, for example, in the first row, you see the concepts of unmarried for Bangladesh, single for Mexico, and never married for Kenya. We consider that all 3 of them are equivalent, and then we assign a harmonized code 100 and a harmonized label of single for the harmonized variable. But this process is a little bit more complex if we go to the unions. And so what our approach is to use a composite coding structure where we have a first digit that represents information available in all of the samples and additional digits that take the information that is available only in some of the samples. So for example, in the first digit here, we distinguish within the code 1, persons who are single, and the code 2, persons who are married in a union. In a second digit, we distinguish between formal marriages and consensual unions. And even in an additional digit, you have further distinctions for these specific concepts, such as the civil and religious unions or the monogamous and polygamous unions. So we do similar work for the persons who are divorced, separated, and widowed. And at the end, we have these harmonized variables with these harmonized codes that are still able to preserve some level of detail from the original samples, but everything into this harmonized coding structure. And with this variable, we're facilitating cross-table comparisons for different censuses from a country or from a region of the world. And users even have the option to work with this more detailed version of the variable, or they can just use a general version at 1 digit that has these like more general concepts available in all of the samples. And we also wanted to provide you with a very quick tour of the data dissemination system. So let me see if I can jump smoothly to the web, and you may be able to see it now. And I'm just gonna show you very quickly a couple things. So this is the homepage for IPUMS International. Each of the different data projects has its own data dissemination system, but with similar characteristics. We're gonna see first the register option. We can see the application form. You can always navigate the metadata and the documentation online without being registered or anything. But if you want to create these data extracts, you have to be registered and you have to submit this application form. And here we request some general information, including your institutional affiliation, and you have to indicate your research project that has to justify that you have access to the microdata. And all of the users also agree to follow certain terms of use. All of them are for the responsible use of the data. So you will not redistribute the data. The data is only for research and for educational purposes, among some additional terms of use. So once all of this is complete, you send it, and there is a real person that is looking at all of the applications. We may require some additional information, but generally within a few days, you can start creating your data extracts. And now I'm going to show you just very quickly how you will create this customized data extract. This is the data dissemination system where you can select variables, where you can select samples, and you can select variables. The variables correspond to two different record types. We have households and persons, and for each of them, we have different topic groups where you will find all of your harmonized variables. So for example, if we go to demographic, you can see relationship to household head, age, sex, or marital status. Each of these rows corresponds to a variable. The X's indicate that the variable is available for the specific sample. But let's very quickly create a data extract. So I'm going to go to select samples. I'm going to choose Argentina. And before choosing some variables, I'm going to just very quickly also show the variable level information. Here we have the codes. Something that is very useful is that you have this link to explore how IPUMS created these variables, so you can see a simplified versions of our translation tables. You also have this description of the variable that we're looking at, relationship to household head. And here you have the comparability text. So we do the best effort to put everything into this harmonized coding structure, but there are always some things that affect comparability, and we want to provide users with information about those details. So for example, you can see here, some definitions of who is considered to be a spouse, or what situations are considered to be children in different censuses. And you also have a country-specific section for that describes, for example, if there are changes in the question that was used to measure relationship to household head, you will see some comments over there. And something very useful, you can also see the specific question that was used during data collection to collect the information about relationship to household head. Separately for each of the censuses. Now let's go back to the dissemination system, and I'm just gonna create very quickly this data extract. We already selected samples, so I'm gonna just select a few variables, let's say relate, age, sex. You may have noticed that the data card is being updated every time I make additional selections. So I'm gonna go to my data card, and I can see here all of the samples that I selected, all of the variables, and in addition to some pre-selected variables that are included in every extract. So I'm gonna go to the data extract, and here you have additional ways in which you can customize even further your data extract. Not gonna show them because of the time, but I invite you to explore these options. So I'm gonna just include a description here. And let me see over my other screen, and I'm gonna submit the extract, and you can see that in order to create an extract, you need to be registered, so I need to log in, and then I am going to send it again. Okay. And now we go to the page where you have all of the data extracts that you ever created. Once this finishes processing, you're going to receive an email. There's going to be a link here where you can download the data file. And you also have syntax files that you can use to read the data in SPSS, in SAS, in Stata, or in R. You always have the options to revise the extracts, and these extracts are available here for a few days. You can always resubmit. And that's all that I wanted to share. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Rodrigo, and thank you, Matt. So yeah, we have a few moments for questions. Thanks a lot, by the way. This is great. It's nice to just have people talk us through what's available. And so, I mean, we're small enough that I think that if people want to like just raise their hand, I can call on you and you can ask a question. While everybody's like working out what they want to ask. Could I ask about? I guess I was curious about the linked data element. I can see that Matt, you were looking at this matrix of links between U.S. censuses. I guess like I'm curious one about like there is a kind of controversy about what's the best way to do that and how kosher are those links and how much should you trust them. It's more of maybe a probability you think on a link, and I wonder if that's something you can vary. And number two, I wonder, is there a goal? Because if you think about IPUMS International, eventually potentially you could link these censuses internationally, and you could have like, you know, in the same way kosher samples that are kind of linking Ireland to the US, for example, and that would open up a whole world of comparative migratory studies, stayers, movers, and so forth. So that's what I thought I'd ask.
Yeah, those are great questions. Yeah, definitely the linked data are imperfect. It is a probabilistic exercise, and a lot of it is just the data quality is not always perfect. And so you know, there was a time when some economists years ago, they were trying to do this linking. They would only look for people with a perfect match because you really don't want false positives. So they would make certain that the name was exactly the same, everything was exactly right. And the problem was that actually was a bad approach and created bad links because the real person had a misspelled name. And so they'd find the wrong person using that supposedly perfect criteria. So you have to have it's a big machine learning kind of exercise to try to weight the probability. If you try to make a training data that's as clean as you can possibly make it, and then you develop this big probabilistic thing, but it's never going to be perfect. And so you really want big extracts or big data as big as you can get, and not take the very finest distinctions and believe that they're necessarily true. You want some pretty robust results, I think, and be aware that no matter what you do, probably change is going to be a little exaggerated even in the best of these samples, because any bad link in the data is going to suggest, oh, that person moved or that person changed socioeconomic status or something, and it's and that's inherent to any sort of bad link. So just it's sensitive data, but it's pretty good though. I mean, I think we do match it against these genealogical records, and we try not to do things that where the match to the genealogical records is lower than about 95% correct. But when you chain them together, you're also additive, probability of there being a bad link somewhere in there. So that's part of it. But the other thing you asked was about linking across countries, and we actually had that in our grant where we did the North Atlantic Population Project. We promised we were going to do that, and we did not do it. I mean, they always cut your funding whenever you get a grant, and this was the thing that we cut. I don't think we could have done it with our capacity at that time anyway. It's challenging, because the data, they don't necessarily know when someone immigrated, and you'd probably have to bring a lot of sources to bear, but it is possible. And I think we're more sophisticated now. And it would, if we could get a grant to do it, and it's hard to fund historical research, as probably you all are aware. And this would only be possible with historical data, because that's the only sort of data where you have the names. Usually the US, it's 72-year privacy. A lot of countries, it's 100 years to get at the names. And so it's pretty old, and it's hard to convince funders that this is so relevant to today that, part of our strategy is we say, well, you can look at people when they were children and link them to the present, and that gives you a lot of power. You could study effects of environmental characteristics and and things that happened in their childhood. But yes, that's a great idea. We would love to do it, and it'd be a great hobby to just link these things together. And and the Nordic countries have such good data that it'd be really clean, probably coming from those countries. It's probably the U.S. that's the problem, because the U.S. is, still in this era it's a messier place, and it's just a more complicated situation. And big cities is where most of the immigrants came to, and those are harder to enumerate.
So we'll circle back at the end of the session for some more questions. So I'll flag people are thinking other things through. There's one more I'll squeeze in before moving on to Mohamed's talk. Victoria asks whether the data is usable for teaching purposes, teaching quantitative statistics, she asks.
Yeah, you want to speak to that, Rodrigo?
Yes, certainly. So yes, it can be used for research, but also for teaching. And here we have also a very useful tool for classes. We have these classroom accounts. So one problem is that you have many students, and then you need to have all of them register. So the classroom accounts offer a simplified registration process where they are still, agreeing to some terms of use, and they are indicating that they are having access for a specific class for some certain amount of time, and you can create data extras that you can share with them in the context of this classroom account. You will have a code that they would use to be able to register. So you can be teaching your classes with real world data.
And we have people get a lot of mileage out of the online analysis system for classes as well. So you don't necessarily have to download the microdata. That you can depends on what you're trying to teach people. You might want to teach them to really wrestle with microdata, but you can do our leader Steve Ruggles, who started IPUMS. He teaches his classes using the tabulator actually. So, it's fairly sophisticated. You can even do regressions and things like that.
Cool. This is great to know. Again, another shout out to our friend and colleague Eric Schneider. So Eric's program moves on now to some research presentations, and we have Mohamed, then Juliana, then Hampton. And so Mohamed has done work on Egypt, and so I'll hand over to you, Mohamed, to tell us about that. You're muted.
Yes, thank you, Niels. So just let me share the screen. Can you see me moving the slides?
No, they disappeared. They showed up and then they disappeared.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Let me try that again. Now?
Good.
Okay. So I think my presentation is in between. So it's not research per se. It's more data presentation, and what I will talk about briefly is this digitization project that I undertook some years ago now, many years ago, I guess, during my PhD. Of the 1848 and 1868 Egyptian censuses. And I'm bringing this up as an example of like this potential collaboration between researchers and IPUMS, because IPUMS has been involved with me in this project from like very early stages, and that was like a very successful, I hope, and still ongoing and promising collaboration. So I'll talk a bit about like what these data are like, and essentially these data, as Matt mentioned, they have been made available on IPUMS International, so you can download them, you can extract them, just as Rodrigo explained. If you choose Egypt, and I think you have to go to the historical tab first in IPUMS International, and then under historical you will find the pre-1950, I guess, samples, or pre-1900 samples. And from there you can, and then you will find the Egyptian data in there with the documentation and the actual individual level data. So what I'm going to talk about is the digitization of these censuses, their significance, and what they have essentially, and what they can be used for, and some examples of how I use them so far. So I'm going to just describe the census registers, how I did the sampling, some statistics, like very simple descriptive statistics, and some future steps of collaborations that I'm hoping to do at some point. So what is the significance of these Egyptian census registers? These are, they come from these mid-19th century records, and they are among the earliest microdata sources from any non-Western country to enumerate the full population. So excluding North America and Western Europe, they are not the earliest. There are earlier ones in Southern Europe, and of course in the Spanish Empire also had in the 18th century there were earlier records. But apart from this sphere, like within Africa, Asia, it's safe to say that they are among the earliest to be at the micro level, right? Like, and that's very important. So they are also among the earliest in the sense of comprehensiveness. So they cover the entire population, and this is unlike other registers that are typical in the Middle Ages and in the pre-modern world, where you find tax registers in which the adult male population, or the tax-paying population to be specific, are the ones that enumerated. So the Egyptian censuses they enumerate the full population, so everyone, including women, including children, including slaves, is enumerated. And this type of full enumeration is like typical in modern censuses, but like to give you like the equivalent, for example, in the US censuses would be the 1850 census, which would have this feature, because before that it was at the household head level. Within the Middle East, they are certainly the earliest. The contemporary Ottoman censuses did not include women until the 1880s. There were some attempts in the 1830s and 1840s from Southern Europe, from like the European part essentially of the Ottoman Empire. But the full Ottoman population censuses took place in the late 19th century, so from 1881. Okay, and they took place under the Egyptian one, the 1848 one, took place under an Ottoman viceroy, which is pictured here, Muhammad Ali Pasha, who ruled in the first half of the 19th century. Egypt at that time was part of the Ottoman Empire, but it was sort of a vassal state, so it had its own autonomy and independence. Hence, you have this earlier attempts at enumeration and like separate bureaucracy in a sense. Like it had developments and reforms that were separate, often parallel, but separate and distinct from the Ottoman reforms. 20 years later, in 1868, was another census, took place under Muhammad Ali's son, Khedive Ismail, from 1863 to 1879. What is Khedive? That's an Ottoman title given to viceroys. Both censuses included, as I said, women and children and slaves. What is the enumeration methodology in these censuses? They are essentially like based on trial and error. So there are multiple enumerations that I found of the same geographic unit, and has been also documented by earlier historians such as Kuno and Dreimer in 1997 article. So that essentially they were like going to the same village. You find the register from 1846, say, and then in the same unit re-enumerating it in 1847 and then in 1848. Why are they doing this? Because they realize that they didn't do it well and they didn't do it correctly, so they go back and redo it. The enumeration followed the de facto principle in the sense that they were actually enumerating people as they are, like where they were living. So if a person is migrating for some reason or is not in the household, they are recorded as such. They would mention their name, but then they would not enlist them, meaning they would put a 0, because there's always a column that has the numbering, and they would put a 0 in front of their name, meaning that this person should not be enumerated here. They should be enumerated instead in their place of residence. Also, servants and slaves, according to this principle, are enumerated within their place of residence, so in the household in which they actually lived. There are some exceptions to this de facto principle, and in particular the protégés, and I have a paper on this. So the protégés are essentially those who were like second passport holders, essentially. So they were people who were protected by European consulates. And according to some agreements with the European consulates, that they were to be enumerated by the European consulates, not by the Egyptian bureaucracy. And proteges, they are mentioned in the census, but they would put a 0 in front of their name. But the good news for us is that they are still in our data, right? It's just that they do not add up to, they do not contribute to the total count. Same thing for military personnel in barracks. So this one is a limitation because we don't have that. Like we don't have the military barracks. We have the military personnel who are in the on vacation or not in duty. But the ones who are actually in military barracks, we don't have them in the census records. And finally, there is like a category of notables, like very high status individuals in 1848, but not in 1868. Where they are mentioned only at the household level. But fortunately, that's only in 1848. In 1868, we do observe them. So they, like, for example, the head of the parliament is in my sample, for example, in 1868. In terms of the enumeration mechanism, we do have some information based on the census orders, at least for the first census in 1848. So it has like it details essentially the instructions that were given to the census takers to undertake this, like how the collectors would do it, how the local administration would actually collect the information from the households, and who's to be enumerated and who's not, like the proteges and notables and so on. And then how is the information to be aggregated, like from the very fine-grained level to the like central authorities. Interestingly, there is no census form, right? So it's not like that in modern censuses that there is actually a form that people have to fill out. That's not the case. What we have is directly census takers recording information in the registers. The administrative census operations varied between urban and rural areas. They were usually undertaken by the heads of the districts or the heads of the villages. There are enumeration tickets that were issued to people, and there were punishments for concealment of individuals. So part of this was about state control, because that was a period in which the coercive capacity of the state, especially the military capacity and the police capacity, increased. Also, we have, luckily, we have also information on collective dwellings. So, for example, prisons are in there. We have information like any collective dwellings, any urban, I forgot the name, but yeah, so the collective dwellings are in there. Registers are organized on a geographic basis, so they are like going by province, and within each urban or rural province, they would go dwelling by dwelling, okay? In rural provinces, dwellings are equivalent essentially to households because there are no multiple household dwellings except in bigger capitals or provincial capitals. In urban provinces, of course, there are multiple household dwellings. And in this case, it will go within each dwelling, it will record household by household. And luckily, the household breaks are clearly marked. So we like it starts always with the word residence of, and that's how we know the household. So that's how it looks like in Arabic. Remember, like the counts, this is what the counts are, like where the counts are, like these are the numbers essentially in Hindi or Indian numbers. Like that indicate one in front of each. This word here is essentially residence of, so that's where the household starts. So for example, the first one is a one person, like this one is a one person household, for example. And then it has the name, it has also the information about the occupational title, and when the person is working in the state, it also mentioned the place of work. And this is another, so that one comes from urban Egypt, that comes from Cairo, this one comes from a rural area, from a village. And again, it has the household clearly marked, and then the total household here is like, it's saying that it has 20 people in it. Typically, males are mentioned before females, and within males, free people will be mentioned before servants, before free servants, and then slaves. Okay. And this is an actual example from the census records. So you have this person, like you have like the detailed information on gender, the name, and that his household had for 40 years under the government control, meaning that they are Egyptians essentially. And you have religion, you have place of birth, and you have the place of work and their occupation. You have the exact address, the street address, and the type of dwelling. I don't want to spend too much time on the sampling design, so essentially, like just quickly, the sampling was done by essentially systematic sampling by page. So following like roughly the same or inspired by the same process that Steve Ruggles did in the digitization of the 1850 censuses in the United States. So the idea here is that you pick a page and then you keep going every X number of pages. And then within a page, once a page is picked, I recorded all households that appear in this page, that begin in this page. So the households are not broken. Sample is stratified. The sampling rate is about 8 to 12% in Cairo and Alexandria, around 1% in all other provinces. There are about 80,000 observations in each census year. The population at that time was around 4.5 million. As I said, the household is the sampling unit, and this is similar to IPUMS US samples from 1848 and from 1850. So this project took place, as I said, during my dissertation, and essentially following this project, I coded also the occupations ex post using HISCO codes, which is standard in historical work. I also mapped the households at the street address level in urban areas and at the village level in rural areas. And the data were publicly disseminated, as I said, in 2021, and they are ready for use. So that's the geographic distribution of the sample by province in 1848 and in 1868. And these are some descriptive statistics of the different variables that appear in the data, such as the relationship to household head, the dwelling legal status, geography, the dwelling type, the gender, religion, ethnicity, legal status, nationality, and so on. So I end by saying that I guess like two major things that I would love to do is increasing the sampling rate like to 100%, at least in the 1868 census, and to be able to do linkage of households across the two census years between 1848 and 1868. Of course, that's a costly project. It's a big project, but one that I'm hoping to do at some point. So thank you very much. I stop here and I leave the door for other people.
Indeed, thanks very much, Mohamed. So why don't we kind of push forward, and then we'll have a kind of some time towards the end to kind of collect questions and there might be some questions for you, Mohamed, then. So next, respecting Eric's agenda, we have Juliana Jaramillo Echeverri, who is going to give us a talk. I'm going to guess it's on Colombia. And so over to you, Juliana.
Thank you, Neil. I think you can see my screen there, right?
Yeah.
So, well, thank you, Neil, for presenting me, and Eric for organizing this, of course. And I actually want to take this opportunity to also thank IPUMS, because I think they do a wonderful work. And they provide like such a wonderful source to work with. So as Neil said, I am Juliana Jaramillo. I work at the Central Bank of Colombia, and I'm going to talk to you about how I use IPUMS to trace the fertility decline in Colombia. during my PhD, I started this research on fertility decline because it was one of the most rapid fertility declines in the world. It mirrored other countries in Latin America, like Costa Rica, where we see that fertility declines really, really fast, from around 7 children per woman to fewer than 3 in just 3 decades. But because in Colombia, we haven't collected and systematized the universe of birth registers from the church, we don't really have good data about fertility patterns prior to 1998. So censuses are an exceptional source in this case. And especially the census that IPUMS provides, because in the census, they already have linked people in the household so that you can trace mothers and children, and you can construct age-specific fertility rates and total fertility rates using this link censuses within the household. I'm not talking here about like how to link individuals across the space, but within the household, we can then identify mothers and children. And with this information, we can calculate total fertility rates. In this case, you're seeing the total fertility rate of Colombia for over 50 years. And we already knew that fertility rates declined really fast at the national level, but I was especially interested in what was happening at the regional level, because Colombia is a very diverse country regionally. So using, again, the IPUMS source, I constructed a measure of completed fertility at the municipal level, which is the smallest administrative unit in the country, to calculate the average number of children ever born to women aged 50 or older. And these allow, with the census of 1973, this allowed me then to identify pockets of high and low fertility. And then I was also able to trace these pockets of high and low fertility over time and see how fertility actually declined in Colombia around the mid-60s, but it declined simultaneously across very different areas that had very different fertility levels. So I think that's kind of striking if we think about what is driving a fertility decline in a country. I was also able to study fertility decline disaggregating by educational attainment, looking at both the intensive margin. So here you have the total fertility rate by educational groups, and you can see again fertility declining really steeply after the 60s, but also a similar pattern of decline for women with no education, with primary education, and with secondary or more. I was also able to examine the extensive margin of the fertility decline. So here you have the percentage of women that remain childless. And as you can see, which I think is an interesting pattern for Colombia and many other countries in Latin America, is that fertility is declining, but also childlessness is declining over time. But just to conclude, I think that more broadly, my research connected by a central question in economic history and in demography as well, that is, if fertility transitions in developing countries are driven by improvements in socioeconomic conditions, or are they being driven by other forces, probably the diffusion of new social norms, values, and attitudes specifically towards family planning. So I calculated also total fertility rates for 16 Latin American countries using IPUMS data, and also code that I released under an open source license that you can check if you're interested in replicating these things. And as you can see, well, fertility in Latin America actually declined really rapid in contexts that vary very much socioeconomically. The coincidence and the synchronicity of the decline of Colombia, Costa Rica, and Mexico, I think is surprising. And also it is surprising to notice that fertility is declining in these countries before the introduction of formal population policies. So that is suggesting that there are other social and cultural transformations that are already in play before social policy, population policies. So, well, I hope that this type of research encourage other researchers to take advantage of this super rich data. And if you have questions, I'm happy to answer any. If you want to know more about the Latin American fertility decline, you can find a small blog in my webpage, and the code is for replicating this is in GitHub.
Thank you, Juliana. So again, yeah, we'll have some time at the end for questions. So next we have Hampton.
Thanks, Neil. Hi, everyone. So I'm Hampton Gatti. I'm a PhD student at the LSE based in the Department of Economic History, but my background is in demography. Like Juliana and also like Mohamed, I've used international IPUMS International data in some recent work that I'm going to present to you now. I don't have slides, but I'll show you the paper itself because it's just come out last month, which is nice. So like Matt was talking about in the first presentation, IPUMS data is so great because all of the individual level records are geotagged at such a fine level of spatial granularity in most cases. And that means that you can calculate a lot of like fundamental, I mean, also more complex things, but for example, fundamental demographic measures at a low level of geographic granularity that aren't normally available in like census reports, for example, contemporary or historical census reports. Yeah, so I make use of the fact that all the IPUMS data is geolocated at this really great granular level in most cases to study spatial patterns in marriage rates across 30 countries that have in the recent past or still today practiced polygamy. And that analysis has been recently published as an article, which I'll share on the screen now so that you can see some of the visuals. Great. You should be able to see that. Cool. So yeah, the purpose of this paper is to investigate the demographic assumptions underlying a theory that's pretty popular in political science, which is that if the cultural norms of a society allow men to be married to multiple women at once, which is commonly known as polygamy and in anthropology is called polygyny specifically, as opposed to women being able to marry multiple men at once. But the idea is if you have polygamy, then the sex ratios of marriage markets end up very skewed so that there's many more single men than single women, and then lots of and potentially a majority of men overall end up being unable to marry because of a lack of heterosexual partners. At least that's the way the theory goes. And the way this theory has come about, the reason it matters for political scientists is because they theorize then that all of these young, angry, unmarried men in polygamous societies are sort of a problem for social cohesion and could be a driver of even civil war, for example, amongst other bad outcomes. But the reason we're looking at this and looking at the demographic side of this specifically is that some demographers have pointed out in the past that if you look at contemporary polygamous societies, most of this work was done in the mid 20th century, but sort of contemporary demography at the time, then you look at the census results from sort of 1960 Nigeria, for example, and you don't find a lot of unmarried young men, actually. All these, unmarried young men running around that you would expect. But no one had looked at whether those men exist in a way systematically, and in general, what the relationship between polygamy and male rates of marriage are in the real world. So we want to try and do that, which is where this paper comes from. So we use data from 74 censuses across, 70 censuses, and then the household surveys from Nigeria that are available also through IPUMS International. So 74 censuses across 30 countries, and then also historical data from the US. I can't quite remember if this is distributed between IPUMS International or IPUMS USA. Matt was talking about earlier, but in any case, we look at 31 countries in total, and our figure summarizing what's going on across the 30 sort of post-1880 censuses is this figure here. On the left, we have the results, sort of the scatter plots where each point is one of these local units, which might be a province, might be as small as a municipality, from 18 censuses that are pretty representative of the 74 overall. And then we have the correlations from all 74 summarized on the right there. And what you see is is the opposite of what the political scientists expected and is in the vein of what previous demographers had expected, which is that if you look at things on the ground, if you look at the available census data, you don't actually find a lot of unmarried men in polygamous societies. In fact, if you look at the subnational level, what these negative associations in green here are showing is that in about half of our 74 censuses, at the subnational level, communities that have higher rates of polygamy actually have lower proportions of young men who are unmarried. So the opposite of what the political scientists expect. And then in most of the other half, you find kind of a statistically null association, which are these yellow associations here. It's only in a few cases where you find the expected positive result. And we go through this whole thing explaining what's actually happening here with some demographic modeling. Part of the story is just that the sex ratios of marriage markets are more feminine than you might think, meaning that there's more leeway for polygamy than if the sex ratio in the marriage market was equal. And then the other thing that's going on here, which we disentangle in part by controlling for everything else. We think that there's a sociological story going on here about the strength of marriage norms in highly polygynous populations, that there's just a really strong social pressure to marry. And so the marriage markets in highly polygamous places within these countries, which are disproportionately rural places, are more efficient in a way than the more urban marriage market, more urban communities within these countries that are represented on the left hand of the x-axis, for example. And then we find something similar, this in our historical US data. Here we're breaking out the US into about 2,000 counties, and the box plot all the way on the right shows the proportion of men in their 20s who have never been married in 1880 in Utah, which the Mormon population in Utah was practicing polygamy at very high rates at this time. And you see kind of matching the data from the 30 more contemporary countries that you find relatively low rates of young men who are actually unmarried in polygamous populations. So that's what we find, and it's all been made possible by this really great IPUMS data. So thanks to the IPUMS team as well.
And thanks to you, Hampton. So that's great. We kind of had the set of presentations. So I can invite anybody. We're small enough, as I said before, that if anybody wants to just raise their hand, and I can call on you for any kind of questions. I guess we're since we've got a few minutes, just working backwards from Hampton and then Juliana. Like Hampton, I mean. It seems a little surprising, the result, I guess, I guess, like, what would be your intuitive explanation? Because I think when you look at this, you would expect there to be migratory responses amongst young men that, like, in these places they just leave, like they're not hanging around for a life of twiddling their thumbs, right? So, and then also, like, I wonder, you did, I don't know if I don't think you mentioned, like, high male mortality. Could that be affecting the marriage markets?
Yeah, so both of those things are going on, but they're not sufficient to explain what's happening, which is why we default to this sociological explanation around marriage norms. But there is qualitative evidence about migration responses, as you might expect, especially rural to urban migration, which is happening for all sorts of reasons, but potentially for a marriage market squeeze as well. But our results persist. These surprising negative, as you say, surprising, which we agree, negative associations persist after you control for the sex ratio. And you would expect, if it was just a story about migration response, you would expect that after controlling for the sex ratio, the sign would actually flip from a negative to a positive association. And they still persist as sort of significant negative associations, controlling for the sex ratio, which could capture a bunch of things, including higher male mortality, for example, making the marriage markets more feminine. that only attenuates the associations by about 15%. Of what we find. So yeah, it's a surprising story, but also yeah, controlling for the sex ratio, which we're able to do because of the structure of the IPUMS data overall, is sort of essential to telling the story, because otherwise you would think it might just be a migration response or a mortality response, for example.
Okay, and I guess my questions for Juliana are you mentioned that you have this code available, and I wondered, like, you know, with the IPUMS international data, could you kind of apply this to other countries, and would that kind of work? Is it tailorable to kind of maybe do some sort of meta-analysis with your methods, so you could do kind of a mega kind of paper using all the IPUMS data, perhaps?
I hope so. I mean, so I created this code for 16 Latin American countries that have data for the period around the 70s. My plan is to extend that and to create like longer trends on that, but also to encourage others to use that. I think that it is kind of really well structured, the data from IPUMS, that all variables have the same name, so it's really easy to customize. You just need to create your own extracts with the variables that are requested by the code, and that's it. So yeah, I think that's what is amazing from IPUMS, that it's easy to create like replicability with this type of data.
Yeah, no, and I think like the standardization of the data makes these kind of meta-analysis possible, the kind of thing that Hampton did, which is to take a specific question and the data is just there, and you can analyze it. And I guess my question for Mohamed, but also like I'll rope in Matt and Rodrigo on this as well. So Mohamed, you had this picture of the actual underlying data, and it was like, you know, it looked fairly kind of, you know, looked like scribbles on a piece of parchment, basically, right? You know, like dashes. And I guess like decoding that required a lot of human reading, but we're at a stage where, with various advances in OCR models and also AI, that with this kind of material, often which is being photographed by the previous generation of archivists, historians, that like I kind of feel with a lot of data sources where we could actually very quickly apply frontier models to generate a lot of data very fast. So I wonder, like Mohamed, in your kind of, when you're going towards 100% here, have you been looking at this kind of space where you could kind of, once you've got the digital images, you could potentially use like new methods to kind of build data much faster than you were able to do before, for example?
Yeah, that's thanks, Neil. So that's a great question, and I think that's the way to go essentially. Of course it's very challenging because so when I did this 12 or 13 years ago, it was essentially, maybe more like 15 years ago, it was more like essentially human beings, like data entry assistants who actually coded and entered the data and coded everything on the spot. Like from registers, not even scans, from the actual registers to the computers directly. Now to do it again, I fully agree that like OCRs, and then like if we have high quality scans, I know that the National Archives in Egypt, they actually created scans, so they digitized high quality scans of the census registers. The challenge will be in the recognition of handwritten Arabic, especially this type of handwritten Arabic. It's 19th century handwritten Arabic, and it varies substantially across scribes and across registers. So that's not going to be trivial. I would say it's a very, as you know, like handwritten registers, even for Latin alphabet, you know, languages, it's demanding and it's not easy. Given also that there is no tabulation, right? That there's no tabular format. It's not systematic. It actually, so you cannot just, you know, train it to take certain fields. So these are very, like, there will be like substantial challenges in that direction. But that said, I agree that that's still maybe better and less costly than doing it by human beings. Yeah.
So, Matt and Rodrigo, I don't know, I guess like for the whole IPUMS space, and particularly, I guess like I'm kind of like I've got an interest in the historical sense. Is there a sense that there's more data coming online or potentially online for subject to grant grant success and whatever in the future?
Well, Rodrigo might know about international data. We get nibbles every once in a while about, Belgian Congo, and I don't know, maybe some other places they do. Mexico maybe has some historical data.
I believe there is a 1930 for Mexico that has not been processed yet. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, and the problem is exactly what you were just talking about. Mohamed was talking about that, getting pictures of them is one thing, but turning them into actual data is another. In fact, we just submitted a grant last week or 2 weeks ago to enrich the USA data collection, and that basically is part of that is for us to start learning these digital, data capture, transcription, OCR approaches. But that's only in the US data and these tabular formats that we're talking about. So we have the handwriting problem, but it's going to be handwriting, capturing those little bits, identifying the bits of the census form to pull out, which, with this free form thing that Mohammed's looking at looks like way harder to me. And we don't really know how effective it will be. I will say that the 1950 U.S. Census, which Ancestry we did with Ancestry, or they gave us their data, they did optical character recognition. That is mostly a machine captured census, and the quality is inferior to the humans. And I think they're working. They do have a human component, and they're trying to improve it, I believe. But there's just a lot of noise that it picks up on those forms that isn't real, that are misspellings that a human would be able to infer. It also captures some things a human couldn't. So there's good and bad, but it's still not. It's in its infancy. I'll say it's not really ready for the hardest problems yet. I would say, as far as we can tell from the. But in 5 years it could be. And so we went for the 5-year grant. We figured that, we'll type it in if we have to. We're only doing a very small Puerto Rico. That's our test case.
Okay, that's good to hear about. Yeah, because I've been kind of looking at this in the context of other kind of mass historical sources for England, for example, things like wills and whatever. And there's challenges with using things like LLMs, which tend to kind of insert things that are from their training data or whatever that you don't want it to do if you're kind of concerned about historical accuracy, and and you don't want it spell checking. You want to preserve whatever's in there, and so I agree. So so it seems like this was a successful conversation. I very much enjoyed it. I'd very much like to thank the IPUMS guys, Matt and Rodrigo, and also our speakers, Mohamed, Juliana, and Hampton, and everybody for listening in. And shout out again to Eric Schneider. We're all we're all wishing him well. And thank you very much, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rodrigo and Matt, for sharing your ideas with us and presenting IPUMS International to our community. Thanks a lot.
Yeah. Well, thanks for the invitation.
Take care.
Thank you. Good
Bye.
seeing you
Thanks.
all.
Come on, bye.
Bye.